As a kid, what's the creepiest, most WTF thing you ever noticed about another kid's family? Viewer discretion is advised. Please do like, share, and subscribe. When I was in 1st or 2nd grade, I was at a friend's house and forgot to turn off the lights when I left the bathroom. My friend's dad lost his shit. He cussed me out, made me stand in a corner, and wouldn't let me leave until I wrote, "I will not forget to turn off the lights when I leave a room," 100 or so times. It was my first and last time going to that friend's house. 2nd grade. I went to a neighbor's b-day party, ate 2/3 of a hot dog and tossed the rest. Friend's dad literally made me eat it out of the garbage, stopped the party, picked it up, handed it to me, got this wild-eyed sneering look on his face and started screaming about how he worked for that and I was going to eat it and respect his hard work and don't waste it. Yeah, the dude was fucking loaded. He could afford to lose 35 cents worth of chicken toes and pork snouts, but apparently the insult from an 8-year-old was too grave for him to accept it. Man, fuck that guy. He passed that shit onto his kids too. They were all insanely status conscious, constantly buying new shit whenever our family did. We kids built a rickety treehouse out of 2x4s. They hired a bunch of day laborers to build a house on stilts for their kids. We got chickens. They hired day laborers to build a picturesque chicken coop. We got a computer. They did. We got a Nintendo. They got Super Nintendo. I didn't realize people like that actually existed, but they totally do. Not really creepy, but definitely WTF worthy. I was friends with a girl growing up, and she didn't come from a very clean home. All the time, there were clothes in huge piles all over her bathroom floor. Okay, whatever. But for some unknown reason, no one in her family ever flushed the toilet. They would sit, shit, and just go on with their life. Every once in a while, when the bowl got too full, someone would just try to flush, thus resulting in a week-old shit and piss pouring out in the floor all over the laundry. 9 times out of 10, they would kick around these clothes, then just leave the scene. They constantly bought new clothes. The worst thing, this was all just completely normal to them. This one has a happy ending. My dad was a contractor, and I made friends with one of his employees' sons because we'd always end up on the job sites with our dads. The first time I slept over at his house, I got there after dark. The house was a giant one-room log cabin. The kid had like 5 siblings, and all their bedrooms were just sectioned off with walls made of clothesline and sheets. Even the bathroom didn't have walls. It was just this massive structure with a maze of hanging sheets everywhere. It made me really uncomfortable that night. Fast forward to the next morning when we go outside to play. We walk out the back door and there's a giant mansion in the backyard. Actually, it was more like this cabin was in front of a yard of a mansion. Turns out, the dad had bought the land and built a cabin for the family to live in temporarily while he built their dream home. He gave every member of the family some awesome feature in their new room, and it remains one of the coolest, most unique homes I've ever been in. We're all still friends to this day, and I would describe them as the most loving family that I know. When I was about 12 or 13, I had this friend who lived in a house with her mother and 4 other sisters. One day, I went to her place while on my period and ended up using her washroom to change my tampon. I put the used one in the garbage can, which had a lid, completely wrapped up in toilet paper. Later in the night, right before dinner, we're all sitting at the table waiting for their mother when we suddenly all hear her screaming from the bathroom, "Who has their period? Who used the tampon?" She came rushing down, and all the sisters denied having theirs. I ended up sheepishly coming clean, to which she said, "And your mother lets you use tampons? Don't you know what that does to your body?" She then proceeded to make a whole dinner conversation out of why tampons are horrible for me and why they've ruined my purity forever, and bragged about how her daughters would never use anything so primitive. Needless to say, I never went there ever again. I thought it was so weird and WTF-y because the only way she would have seen my used tampons is if she had actually gone through the garbage looking for something incriminating. The thing is, that's totally something this woman would do, to try and find something to yell at her daughters about. And she did. When I was about 11 or 12, I had a friend that lived in a really big house in my neighborhood. We were never allowed to go to her house, outside or inside. One day, we were riding bikes, and I fell right near her house and I insisted we get a napkin from her house to clean the blood. She was really weird about it. I only went into the kitchen, and there was a door that was closed. She opened it and yelled that I was in the house. Her mom came in. She was a very pretty woman and was wearing a silk robe. She told us to hurry up and then sent us on our way. About 3 months later, they were in the news for running an illegal escort service out of their home. Both of her parents went to jail, and my friend was sent to Florida to live with her grandma. I can't imagine what her life was like during that time or afterwards. Neighbor kid took out a stick of butter and started dipping it into a canister of Kool-Aid. After licking all the mix off the butter, he repeated it over and over, as if it was that fun dip candy. It skeeved me out, and I declined his generosity when he offered me the Kool-Aid and the butter. His older sisters were there, and they said they do this all the time. It's great. Went to a friend's house and could hardly breathe when I stepped through the front door. They had like 20 dogs or cats and would just let them piss and shit anywhere in the house. The smell of ammonia was so strong I could barely breathe. It was so bad that all the floorboards were just soaked with urine and were rotted. I used to hang out with a kid whose family not only didn't have a litter box for the cat, but wouldn't pick up the cat shit either. The only reason I went over there was because he had an Atari 2600. I always came home with cat shit on the bottom of my shoes. I grew up down the street from this family of 4, mom, dad, son that was my age, and adopted son that was like 6 years younger than us. The son my age was pretty quiet and a little odd, but definitely fully functioning, which I feel like I have to mention to understand just how weird this was. One day, the mom approached me and asked if I could be a babysitter for them over the summer. Myself and the older son were both around 13 at the time. I assumed the son my age was busy or something, and I was to watch his younger brother. But when I got there, both of the boys were there. About an hour in, I realized I'd been hired to babysit both of them. I would try to make it less weird by making it like the two of us were babysitting his brother together, but then he'd go do weird shit, like ask if he could play his video games and if he could stay up a bit past his bedtime to finish a movie or something, and he'd address me with Mr. and then my first name. It was just really uncomfortable, especially having class with him once we were back in school. My best friend, when I was 12, had a very pretty little sister who was a couple of years younger than us. One time, when I was sleeping over at his house, we went into his dimly lit basement to get his mother, and she was entertaining a couple of creepy-looking old men who were drunk and awfully friendly with his sister. They were asking her for kisses and to sit in their laps. His mother looked deeply depressed, and I remember feeling so strange and so uncomfortable that I blacked out this memory for decades. I found out a year ago that my friend's sister killed herself at 35, leaving her 9-year-old son without a mother. So this wasn't me, but it happened to a teacher I had back when she was my age, 22, interning as a school psychologist in the mid-80s. So there was this 5-year-old girl she noticed in a class would never sit down. Everyone thought this little girl was a stubborn shrew of a child because she would never listen and insisted on standing and walking everywhere. So my teacher notices this and had just learned that refusal to sit down can be a sign of physical abuse because it's pain for the kids who get beaten across the backside to sit still. Makes sense. So my teacher mentions it to the classroom teacher and get blown off repeatedly. She says something to the school psychologist she's interning with and gets blown off. Both of them tell her they see this all the time, that she is new, doesn't know what she's talking about, and that this little girl is just a troublemaker. My teacher is really distraught, so she goes back to her own graduate professor who tells her to talk to the school nurse. Thankfully, the nurse is cooperative and calls this little girl into her office. She asks her some questions on if she has been hurting in her private areas, and she says no. So the nurse asks if they can examine her. This little girl drops her underwear, hops up on the table, and exposes herself like it was no big deal. Some stranger was asking that. My teacher says she has never seen a more horrific example of prolonged sexual abuse to this day. There was nothing normal about how this girl looked down there. The nurse is horrified, and the school calls the cops. The cops question the parents and think the mom knows what is going on and is involved in the abuse, because how could a mother not know about what is going on with her own kid? The cops discover that the mom worked nights and for her whole life had never once put her daughter to bed or woken her up in the morning. This girl's father had been molesting and raping her since she was an infant, and no one ever knew. They also found out he was starting to molest their other 2 siblings in the house who were younger. That little girl had to have total reconstructive surgery. Kill him. The parents did lines of coke around the table like it was nothing. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but when I asked my mom, I wasn't allowed over there anymore. During primary school, I was involved in an out-of-school program that required traveling to another local school. Because my parents worked during the day, they arranged for me to be picked up by the mother of one of the other children in my class. We went back to their place where I was to wait until my mother came to pick me up. While I was waiting, her son picked up a book and his mother turned to him and said, "What if I told you about touching your stepfather's stuff?" She then grabbed him by the ear and pulled him over to his bedroom, shoved him in, and locked the bedroom from the outside with a heavy bolt. I can remember hearing screaming from the other side of the door. I can't remember exactly what she said to me, but it was something along the lines of, "This is why it has to be." I told my parents, and needless to say, I never got a lift home with them again. Also, a few months later, he was removed from his parents after he set fire to his bedroom. I stayed at this girl's house on a school night for whatever reason, and we all had to take a bath. They told me to go first, but I was playing with this girl's only toy, a globe, and said I'd go last. Little did I know, they all used the same freaking bathwater. There were like 5 kids and 2 adults. They all 7 of them, took a bath in the same water. I got pushed to the end of the line, and when my turn was up, the water was brown. I mean, no longer transparent. I cried, and they called my mom and then ran me new bathwater. It would appear that they were really poor, but no. Her dad was an orthopedic surgeon. WTF. When my friend and I went swimming when we were 9 years old, we changed at the pool. He had no scrotum. I told his mother and she said, "That's okay, we know." Now, I didn't know much then, but I knew the doctors better fix those undescended testes before puberty. I was a science geek and knew this. He never got them fixed, and as an adult, one became cancerous. He's now 48 years old, unmarried and without children. Goddamn, stupid parents of his. I grew up in a horrible housing estate in London called Aylesbury Estate. I lived in the 12th floor of a high-rise block. I made friends with a boy called Nicky who was from Grenada, and he was black. He lived with his mother and father, or so I thought. I went round his place to play with a new fire engine I bought with birthday money. His house was so strange. Every single light in the house was red. Every fucking bulb. His mother's bedroom had a bolt lock on the inside for some reason. I saw his dad for the first time, but something was amiss. He wasn't black. He was 100% white. I was creeped out for a while. I went round his place again the following week, and the man he called Dad had changed. He was a completely different man, and the same happened again and again. Here's where it gets really fucked up. His mother died, and he went into care. I asked my mom why he didn't live with his dad. It turns out his mother was a prostitute and had convinced Nicky that his dad was a shapeshifter. She convinced her son his dad was a shapeshifter when they were just customers. This was about 40 years ago. I never saw Nicky again, sadly. When I was around 8 to 9 years old, there was a girl in my neighborhood that hardly anyone ever saw outside of school. She was maybe a year younger than me. I tried talking to her a few times, and she was very, very shy. She was never allowed at other kids' houses. Reasonable, I guess. There were a lot of questionable people in our town. However, no one was allowed over at her house either, not even in her yard or on her driveway. This was because, in her words, her parents didn't like kids. Okay, one friend of ours managed to see into her house a few times. Apparently, all the furniture was always covered in plastic and everything was dark. We went maybe a month without seeing her outside of school, which was normal. One weekend, a friend and I saw her walking down the sidewalk, and she told us that her father had died. Her mom told her that he started bleeding from the inside after he ate some crayons she didn't clean up, and that was her fault for not cleaning well enough. She lived in the same house until after high school. She hardly ever spoke, and when she did, it was just a whisper. She sort of seemed like a small child a lot of the time with how she acted and pronounced words. If I weren't just a clueless kid then, I probably would have said something to someone. When I was 8, I took a trip for a month to Alabama to visit my friend and his family. His parents were extremely Catholic and had very strong on contraceptives. One day, while I was there, we took a family trip to the grocery store and poked holes in condom boxes. I didn't realize what I had done till years later. I still feel really bad about it. TLDR, friend's family made me poke holes in condoms. I had a friend in middle high school whose house no one had ever seen the interior of. Whenever we hung out, it was at someone else's house. If me or one of my other friends came by to pick her up to go somewhere, she didn't drive, we were never invited in and had to wait outside until she was ready. My other friends and I were always convinced her parents did some sort of top secret government work or something like that. One of my friends finally did see the inside of her house. After dropping her off and having to pee so bad, she threatened to go in the bushes in their yard. Turns out the parents were hoarders and had stacks of papers everywhere, and that's likely why no one was ever allowed inside.